yeah, today I thought I would bring you a book about dystopia because I don't know about you, but every time I look at the news at the moment I feel as though I live in a dystopia. So I think dystopian is something we can turn to and learn from at the moment, hopefully, and not make the mistakes that have been fictionalised in the past would be nice, maybe. So I'm going to talk to you about some of my favourite dystopian reads that I think everybody should be reading at the moment because I think they're quite important and relevant, and I'm also going to talk about the dystopians that I have planned for my TBR. So firstly, I have to mention 1984 by George Orwell. I don't have a copy of this, but I know that Jane Campbell is going to be doing a read-along. I'll link her down below. She's going to be doing a read-along of this soon because it is relevant. I'm not the biggest fan of 1984, but I think it's one that I need to reread. I read it a long time ago and it wasn't necessarily my kind of thing, and also for me I look for really beautiful language, and I think 1984 is politicised to a degree that the political side of things is more important than the literary side of things, which is fine and important in a dystopia, especially at the moment. But for me, it didn't necessarily float my boat, but it's one that is like the godfather of dystopian, so it's worth mentioning here. It's basically about a world in which nobody is free. Basically everyone works and lives under the system, and sort of everything they do is watched by the higher power called Big Brother, and the main character ends up sort of realising that things aren't as they seem because everyone's kind of brainwashed into living in this system, and he starts trying to revolt against the system and do little things of rebellion, and we follow how that ends for him. What I would say is that if you have read this and enjoyed this, or if you read it and didn't like it like me, there is another book called which is by, let me just read it, Yevgeny Zamyatin, which again I don't have. This is a Russian novel and is really fantastic. It's actually the inspiration for 1984. I don't think a lot of people realise. I think a lot of people think 1984 is like the original dystopian. Basically, it's copyrighted off and is a novel that's much more poetic in its language, which is why it appealed to me, and it also looks more at the personal aspect rather than the political aspect of what's happening. But it's the same idea. People are sort of in this really tight-knit community where basically everything they do is watched by a higher power, and they're sort of tricked into thinking it's all fine because it's all for the greater good, and they are a unit, so there's no individual needs or desires in this unit, and so anybody who starts having individual needs and desires is seen as unwell and they are suffering from soul. So I really liked the idea in this that soul is an illness that needs curing, and as I say, it's pretty much the same plot as 1984, but I would say this definitely was more for me, and I think a lot more people should be reading this one. As I say, it was before 1984, and I don't think George Orwell made any bones about the fact that he got his inspiration from this book. So if you want to start at the beginning, go to and then I've got some books here that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to start with Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is kind of opposite to dystopia in the fact that it is utopia. So it's a world that is completely happy and everybody's completely happy. But then, of course, happiness isn't always as complete as it seems. And again, our main character realises that things aren't necessarily right and that, yes, everybody's happy, but should they be? And he sort of, again, tries to go outside this really happy system and live on the edge of society, as it were, and it shows how things go for him and how quickly a really seemingly happy society can turn on you if you do something that doesn't necessarily fit with the ideas of what you should be doing. This is, again, a classic and is well worth a read. Then I've got Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. I need to reread this one. It's been a while since I read it, but basically this looks at a world in which it's basically a feminist dystopia. So women can no longer have children. I can't remember quite why. I think there was just an illness that made it so that a lot of women were fertile. And the women who can still have children are given away to families and successful rich couples who cannot have their own children, and they are called handmaids. And they basically have to have sex with the man in this household, and they are treated as lower citizens, but they are the only people who can give birth to babies. And what I found really interesting in this is that it looks at the idea of how the handmaids also treat each other as well as how they're treated by the rest of society. And there was one scene in here that I can remember was really harrowing. That was actually the handmaids treating each other really badly. So again, this is really interesting. If you're into feminism and dystopian, this is one to read for sure. Then I've also got some other Margaret Atwoods. So I've got her Mad Adam trilogy, which is Oryx and Crake, Year of the Flood and Mad Adam. I have yet to read Mad Adam and I must do so soon. But basically, Oryx and Crake in Year of the Flood. It's in a world where everything has fallen, society has fallen, and it just looks at what happens, and it also looks at the scientific side of the future and dystopia. So it looks at, I mean, these were written before sort of cloning and things like that had started, and it looks at the idea of cloning and the idea of making animals spliced with human organs and things like that, which scarily has started to happen in our society today. But it's really interesting to read them now because obviously they were written before these things were happening, and now these things are happening, so it's quite scary to look at a world in which these things have already been taking place and have already gone quite horribly wrong, let's be honest. Then I've also got Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Again, this is a classic. I loved this book when I was younger. I have to say I reread it a few years ago and wasn't as blown away by it, but I think that's because I've read more dystopia, and this was probably one of the first dystopians I really read. This is a definite good one for the book lovers out there because it looks at a world in which owning books is illegal. You are no longer allowed to have books because obviously they give you knowledge, and knowledge is dangerous in this world. So instead of putting out fires, firemen start fires to burn books, and Fahrenheit 451 is actually the burning point of books, and it looks at the people who disobey the rules and keep books anyway, and the main character is one of the firemen, and he starts to realise that maybe they shouldn't be burning these books, maybe there's valuable information in these books, and it's really fascinating. I would definitely recommend it. As I say, anyone who loves books is bound to love this one. Then I've also got Station 11 by Emily St John Mandel. This looks at the breakdown of society and the sort of immediate aftermath of that breakdown and how people start to rebuild society after it has fallen apart. It's really interesting. Most people have read this by now. It's also sort of got a load of Shakespeare stuff in there. One of the characters in here is an actor, and she moves around with this moving theatre company who produce Shakespeare plays for people to watch after the end of the world has happened. It's really interesting. As I say, it's nice to see, and I don't know that any other dystopian I've read has done this, where it's you see the breakdown of the society and then you see it being built back up again, and I think that's really interesting because people kind of look at dystopia as the world has ended and people are just trying to survive. But obviously if that happened, I think people would start building up, and it's interesting to think about what kind of society would build out of the ashes, as it were. And finally, I have got LMNOP by Mark Dunn. I wanted to put this in here because not many people know about this, and I think it is a book that's well worth reading. So this is about a world not dissimilar to our own, and it's written in letters. So it's from one girl called LMNOP to her cousin, I think it is, and it starts off that she's starting to think that maybe things are a bit strange. There's a big statue in their town that has the sentence "Quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," which is a sentence that uses every letter in the alphabet. One of the letters has fallen off, and we know that from the first letter, and the government are sort of confused about what to do because they're kind of looking at the sign as this otherworldly sign that they should stop using that letter. So they then decide to ban that letter, and then mysteriously other letters start to fall off, and as they are banning letters, the letters that LMNOP is writing to her cousin become obviously quite sparse because she's having to find words that don't include the illegal letters, because you can get the death sentence for using the illegal letters. And it kind of becomes clear as we're going through that maybe it's a bit of a government conspiracy, and that Ella certainly suspects that it is the government that are knocking off the letters to try and limit communication. They've cut off the phone lines and the internet and everything like that, and obviously the only way people can communicate is through talking or writing letters, and the government are making that increasingly hard. It's really interesting. I'd probably say it's one of the closest to our society that I've had in a dystopia, and it's quite chilling, and also the way it is written is fantastic. To be able to write a novel, by the end he's only got like 3 letters left to work with, and yet it still manages to be quite cohesive. Unless you knew that letters were being purposefully missed out, you wouldn't necessarily notice, which I think is such skill, and it is well worth a read. Then I'm also going to talk about 2 dystopians that I plan to read soon. So I've got Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I have been wanting to get to this for a very long time. I've been wanting to read Cormac McCarthy for a very long time. I don't know much about this, although I do know it's dystopia-esque. It's basically about a sort of dystopian America where a father and his son are moving across the landscape and trying to come to terms with what's happened. That's about as much as I know about it, but I'm very excited to read that one. And then I've also got It Can't Happen Here by Sinclair Lewis. Simon at Savage Reads is doing a read along for this next month. I will link him down below. He's where I found out about this book, and the best way to describe this is to read you the back. So, a vain, outlandish, anti-immigrant, fear-mongering demagogue runs for president of the United States and wins. Sinclair Lewis's chilling 1935 bestseller is a story of Buzz Windrip, who promises poor, angry voters that he will make America proud and prosperous once more, but takes the country down a far darker path. As the new regime slides into authoritarianism, newspaper editor Thomas Jessup can't believe it will last, but is he right? This cautionary tale of liberal complacency in the face of populist tyranny shows it really can happen here. And it really has, so I think this is going to be very interesting. Probably a petrifying read, but interesting nonetheless, so I'm very much looking forward to getting to that one. If you have any other dystopian reads that you think would be useful to get through these hard times and sort of show us what we shouldn't do, then please leave those down below for people to check out, and I will definitely check them out as well, and I hope you are all well. Bye!